I got a request to do a video about overlapping action, and so let's get right into it. I'm using TV Paint 10, and you can visit their website, tvpaint.com, if you want more information about this software. So this is a new document. I've got down here a timeline where we're going to put our frames. I'm using a pencil tool, and then I have some hotkeys that are set up to flip my pages, and that's going to be very important because if you can't flip your pages, you can't see what you're doing. You have to be able to roll your drawings while you animate. Alright, so what is overlapping action? It has to do with the fact that the transfer of energy from objects to their different parts happens at different points in time. It's not even worth trying to describe it in words because it's just intuitive, and as we get into it you'll see exactly how it works. So first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a pendulum. I'm going to make a little background here. It's not really important. This is just a little hook for the pendulum to hang from. I'm actually going to make that even smaller so we have plenty of room. Alright, so this is a background. I'm going to call this our background layer. I'm going to make a new layer. This one, I'm going to lock it. This is going to be where our pendulum goes. I've got a hotkey that changes my key bindings, so I have to turn it off. Alright, so let's say that we've got a pendulum and it's going to swing. Let's say it's going to swing like this. It's not going to be that large because we're going to put other stuff in the background and I don't want us to get cut off at the edges. You'll see what I mean in a minute. Alright, so let's start the pendulum about here. I'm just going to draw the round part. I'm not going to worry about the string yet because when it's time for the string, I'm going to do the straight line tool. There's a line tool in TV Paint. Alright, we'll just leave that there for now. It may not be pretty, but that's what we'll have. Alright, now pendulums swing in arcs that are semicircular. They follow the path of a circle. And so in order to make life easier, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take an ellipse tool. I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to call it arcs. And with this ellipse tool, let me see. With this ellipse tool, with red selected, I'm going to make a circle whose center is where the pendulum arm originates and whose radius is where the end of the pendulum arm is. So we know that the top of the pendulum weight is not going to ever be any higher than this circle. Now I'm going to make another one for where the bottom of the pendulum weight is. We have two concentric circles. This is the guide for where our pendulum is going to always be. I'm going to fade that down. And go back to drawing in the pendulum. Alright, so I'm going to work at 12 frames per second. Animation is frequently at either 12 or 24 frames per second, or it might be at 24 with some frames being, with some images being held for 2 frames and some of them being for only 1. But for now, I'm going to be at 12 frames per second. So we're going to go straight ahead. What does that mean? We're going to go to the next frame, and we're going to animate 1 frame at a time. I'm going to make sure that these background elements stay still, even if they're only 1 frame long. I want to make sure down here that I hold them, because if I don't have them held, the second I go to a new frame, the arcs disappear, everything's gone, I lose my guides. So I want to make sure that the guides are on hold. Alright, so I've got a key that's set to flip, to play everything I have up to the current frame that I'm on. So that way what we can do is start to move 1 frame at a time and let the motion unfold. still in circle mode. Watch what's happening. Because I'm flipping, I can see, relatively speaking, whether I'm too close or too far away from the previous drawing to give myself the speed that I really want. So the pendulum is starting to drop, but it doesn't drop right away. It gradually falls. And when you work straight ahead, what you can do is you can eyeball where things should be. So I can get a sense from the momentum of the frames that I have so far of where the energy is taking this pendulum. And that will show me where along this arc the next frame should lie. And this is what spacing is about. Should the next drawing, how far away should I draw the next drawing relative to the ones that came before it? So this is starting to get up some steam now. And when you flip, you can feel, okay, you can feel where would it be at this split second in time. And by flipping, you can kind of do it by instinct. You don't need to do a whole bunch of really anal pose-to-pose things where you make everything perfectly in between, and then it ends up just looking really dull. Because life doesn't really work that way. Things aren't perfectly in between. They're not perfectly spaced. Now what's happening is that as the pendulum is coming back up to its peak, it's kind of going to slow down a bit because the energy which was conveying it up to the top is starting to run out, and gravity is starting to pull it back down. But there's a point where the two forces are fighting with each other. They're competing. The force that brought the thing up still has a little bit of steam left, and gravity is starting to pull it back down. So it has a moment of almost weightlessness or free fall. And during that time, the motion becomes slow, and it can even stop. So if you look at these one at a time, you'll see that when the pendulum is at the top of its arc, the first couple frames, there isn't much motion, a small amount of motion. Then as it gets faster, the pendulum is farther away in each drawing because it's moving faster with each little increment of time. And then as it gets up to the top, the spacing gets tighter again because it's gradually coming to a stop. That's timing and spacing in a nutshell. Things move at a different pace, and when you make your drawing, you want to put it the right distance away relative to the previous drawing. Alright, now the pendulum's going to start making its way back down. Maybe it's got one more drawing where it's still up here. This is all, you do this all by feel. You can't really make an exact science of it. You just go with it and keep flipping so that you can see what you're doing, and you can help yourself get into the flow of where things feel like they ought to be. Alright, now we're almost back up to the beginning. Now I'm going to set this layer to repeat mode so that it'll loop to the beginning and the end. You'll notice that I just turned the light table on. I haven't been using the light table at all through any of this. Alright, we got, it doesn't loop quite yet. We have to add a couple more drawings to get this back to where it starts. And I'm going to use a light table to guide me here, but most of the time you should not use the light table because it interferes with your ability to see what you're doing. It seems like it should be great, like, oh, I can see everything, I can see where every drawing is all the time. You don't want that. You only want to see the drawings flip in front of you. You don't want to see them all superimposed because you won't be able to see anything. Let's see if this is any better. What I think I'm going to do at this point is, in order to make it loop correctly, I'm just going to cut the frames off here and see how this looks. Alright, and just because I think it should be a little bit further up here, I'm going to move this up. You have to watch your animation a lot to get a feel for where it should be at. The first swing, when it swings to the left, it's still not going far enough, and it feels like it's getting artificially stopped too low. It feels like it's banging into something on this side. So I'm going to bring this up a little bit more so that it's a little bit more symmetrical. The advantage to planning this out with pose to pose is that you can make sure that your pendulum arcs are perfectly symmetrical, but it can get really difficult to flip correctly when you've charted out all of your poses in advance. It can get very difficult to get a feel for the momentum of them correctly. So I think it's usually better to just work straight ahead and then go back and fix things. Okay, so we need one more in here. So this is really just a refresher on spacing, because in order to talk about overlapping action, you have to understand the concept of spacing and why you want to vary your spacing according to how much things are moving. When things are moving less, you want the drawings to be closer together. When things are moving more, like when something is further away, you draw the next drawing further away from the first one. I think we're almost there. I'm going to move this up just a little bit more. Let's try that. And then we need maybe one more cushioning drawing. I'm going to turn off the light table again because it's distracting me. Alright, let's see how that is. It's not perfect, but it's close enough. Alright, so now that we've got the pendulum where it ought to be, I'll put in the pendulum, the arm of the pendulum, and that's going to be pretty simple. Just try to keep it centered. Now, if you were to do this, trying to do this pose to pose, so planning out the top of each side and then the middle position and then the breakdowns, yeah, you could certainly do that. But when you do that way, you tend to bring a certain amount of mathematical precision to it. Like, for example, it would be very tempting to put the middle position right down here dead center, to put a drawing right down there. But who's to say that you would ever really perceive that position? Maybe you just skip over it completely. That's why I think that working straight ahead speaks more to the experience of looking at things than the ideal of how they ought to be according to some kind of mathematical perfection. So let's see, is there anything else we can do here? Might be a little bit too slow coming back out. Maybe I want to get rid of this drawing. Let's see how that works. I think I need one more drawing to suggest the arrival of the pendulum. Let's see how this looks. Maybe one more even. Because when things gradually come to stop, it helps give that suggestion of momentum. This one's looks like this one's a little bit too much. It starts getting a little mushy. Okay. I don't want to spend all day on this, so let's call this the pendulum part done. Okay, so this is a refresher on spacing. You got more drawings where the object is moving more slowly, and you've got fewer drawings to communicate fast motion here. So let's go through this one frame at a time. When it's at the top of its descent, it starts off gradually moving, and then each drawing, this drawing is probably best to get rid of, this drawing, these two drawings are further apart from each other than these two drawings. These two drawings are further apart from each other than these two drawings. These two drawings are further apart than these two drawings. These drawings get closer together until they're almost just the same drawing multiple times. Okay, so that's timing and spacing in a nutshell. We got this pendulum here. Let's lock it down and make a new layer. So to give you an idea about overlapping action, we don't need the arcs anymore because the pendulum's pretty much going to do its thing. I like to use the example of a coat. Let's imagine that hanging from this pendulum is a jacket, and as it swings, the coat is swinging along with the pendulum. But it's not going to swing exactly at the same time. There's an element of drag, so that the pendulum swings and the coat is going to drag behind it. And in order to make that believable, I don't believe that it's that possible to pick any one moment in time, any one pose, so to speak, and plan and know exactly where all the elements are going to be at a time. It's just there's too much going on. I don't believe that it's possible, or at least if it is possible, it's not easy. But animating straight ahead is easy, and if we can do it, we should do it. And one of the ways to keep it in control is to do it gradually using one element at a time. So the pendulum is swinging, and as I flip through the drawings, I can see where the energy is at its peak. So as it passes by the bottom, it's really picking up steam. And what I can do is try to get a feel for where would the body of the coat be. I'm going to do this one little bit at a time. I'm not going to do the whole coat. I'm going to start with the sort of a tube representing the still in straight line mode, representing the bulk of the coat without worrying about the sleeves yet, because we're going to do the sleeves one element at a time. So the coat's going to drag behind. It's in the wind. It's got some weight of its own. So let's look at it like a tube. Here's the inside of the coat. Here's the collar. It's hanging on the pendulum weight here. And let's flip and see. Let's see. Does that feel right? It's dragging. We only have one drawing so far, but the question is, does it really feel like it ought to feel? I'm not actually that happy with it quite yet. I think we could push it even further. So what I'm going to do is get rid of that and see where we are. First of all, I'm going to make sure that I have spaces for all these drawings. I'm just going to put a bunch of blank frames, the same number of frames as I have for my pendulum, because I'm going to have a drawing for each frame of the pendulum swing for the coat. Alright, so I'm going to try to get a feel for what's going on here, and I'm thinking that this thing is dragging even more. So I'm going to put the body of this coat really swinging at this point. It's good so far. Okay, next drawing. When you work straight ahead, it makes it really easy to see where things should go. Alright, so the coat's swinging, and it's still swinging, and you can see this flow, this arc that it's making as it's being dragged by the pendulum. And I think you really do have to work straight ahead on this, because your instincts will tell you about things that are going on that your intellect would not very likely be able to rationally predict. So as this thing starts to get to its apex, as the pendulum starts to move upward, the coat is now starting to hang down a bit more. Now the force of gravity is starting to pull down on the coat, which is affecting a tension between the momentum of the pendulum and the effect of gravity on the coat. So, and if you watch this as it goes straight ahead, then you can feel where these things would go, one frame at a time, and really getting a sense of the fact that this, now when the coat's at its peak, when the pendulum's at its peak, the coat is still moving. You have to do this straight ahead. There's no other way of doing it. There's no way that you would be able to plan this out and just objectively know, oh, it's going to keep moving this amount, because you'll just have to do it by feel and what looks right. So this thing is still moving, but now the pendulum is starting to come back down. Now you've got these two forces that are almost in conflict with each other. So this back part of the coat is flipping up because it's continuing the arc that was started by the pendulum, and the top of the coat is starting to come back the other direction. This thing is moving, has changed direction already, but this part has not yet. And that's what overlapping action is. Likewise, this next frame, the top of the coat is following the pendulum because it's attached. It has nowhere else to go. But the bottom is still on its upturn. It's still moving with the momentum. In fact, that momentum is even accented by the opposite force of the fact that the pendulum is starting to go downward. And now you could even say that the bottom of the coat has its own peak here. And it's okay to just work really rough on this because you have to feel out things. You have to go very much by feel, very much by instinct, and you just have to kind of find, by constant comparison, where things feel like they belong. Alright, so the coat is traveling back in the other direction. The top is going to get to the top before the top of the coat is going to reach the beginning before the bottom, and the bottom is going to catch up. And once again, once the pendulum starts to get to the top of its arc, gravity starts to act on the coat. Alright, now we come to the end of our cycle here, but we have to fill in the beginning. So at this point, I can loop these frames and go back to the beginning. I think I want to fix this frame. I don't like it. I think this should be moving, overshooting a bit more. Overshooting means that the pendulum is only up at this point, but the coat goes further than the pendulum because it's free to move. Top of the coat is constrained by the pendulum, but the bottom is not. So it's going to keep moving out. And that's going to give it a real naturalistic look. And once again, we've reached the point where the top of the pendulum is starting to come down, but the bottom of the coat is still on its way up because of that overshoot phenomenon. And also because of the Newtonian action-reaction effect of the coat, of the pendulum starting to swing the other way. The top of the coat is swinging one way, and the bottom of the coat is flipped up. We're almost at the end of this stage. Let's see where we're at. Alright, this drawing, the first drawing that we made, is not quite right anymore. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to fix it. It was a good starting point, but now that this is flowing from the beginning of the timeline, I can go back and modify these drawings to be more in keeping with what we've established. I'm going back and redoing a bunch of these frames that I started out with because I like the momentum that we got from the other side a little bit more, and I want to follow that through instead. So let's see how that looks. It looks pretty good. You could continue polishing this forever if you wanted, but I think for the purposes of explanation, this shows one of the main principles. Now we're going to add another level on here. We're going to do each sleeve, but we're going to do them one at a time, and you'll see that once again we're going to work straight ahead, and we're going to do this based on where things feel like they should be, based on the hierarchy of momentum that starts with the pendulum and then works its way down. So I'm going to duplicate this layer. I want the same amount of frames and I want everything else to be the same, but I just want them to be blank. So I will open this up. There we go. Sorry, one of these panels is on another screen and I had to move it. Okay, so we're going to do a sleeve. Once again, I find it a little bit difficult to start at the top of this peak, so I'm going to go down to where you really feel like the momentum is starting to work. I don't want to affect anything I've done already, so I'm going to lock that layer down. Alright, so here's a sleeve. Sleeve is just going to be a tube. It's just going to be like a flag blowing in the wind. The sleeve, like the coat, is dragging behind the main impetus of the force, but because it's free from the coat a little bit, it's attached to the coat but it can still move on its own, it's going to do its own thing. So like for example here, the sleeve's going to overshoot the coat. Sleeve's going to keep going because it can. As this gets to the top of its arc, the sleeve is lighter and it's going to start moving past the place where the coat can't get to yet. And the sleeve is going to reach its own peak at a different time than the rest of the coat. And I can't imagine any other way to do this than straight ahead. It's just how you have to do it. Which means that if you're using an animation software package like Flash, you have to figure out some kind of a hotkey or a script that allows you to play back your animation every single time you want to and stop on the frame that you're on, so that you can intuit where you need to be at this very moment in time. And scrubbing the timeline doesn't really cut it, because unless you have supernatural mousing ability, you're not going to scrub the timeline exactly at the right pace. And you need to see this in real time. It's just, you know, you're building motion. You need to see it in motion for it to be right. And as we get back up to the top here, we're going to have another overshoot. The sleeve is going to keep moving. That's a little bit too much. Let's see. We're going to get back up to the beginning here. Let's go back to once again, the coat is starting to descend, and the sleeve is still in a point of free fall. It's getting dragged, but that drag does not move instantaneously. It takes some time for that energy to reach the end of the sleeve. the sleeve's over there and the coat's down here, and the coat's pulling as fast as it can possibly pull, but the sleeve can only catch up so fast. And things like weight and air resistance will affect that too. So let's see how this looks. Alright, so we've got pretty good setup here. Now we're going to do the other sleeve. And the other sleeve is equally independent from the rest of the garment. So we're going to do this one more time. Lock this down. Alright, so let's go back to nice midpoint. And I think it's somewhat natural to observe variation in the fact that these two sleeves aren't going to do stuff at the exact same time. One of them might even sort of flip up compared to the other, and depending on the right or left-handedness of the pendulum swing, one sleeve may drag in the air a little bit longer than the other. And that's the advantage of, one, working straight ahead, of course, but two, keeping all of these elements on their own layers so that you don't have to alter the whole drawing every time you want to make a change. If I want to only change the sleeve, then I can change only that one sleeve and I don't have to throw out a whole drawing. And it's just very fun to work this way. It takes a lot of the brain power out of it. You don't have to do a whole lot of brute force math to try to calculate where absolutely everything is going to be at every moment in time. Because I think that your unconscious is more intelligent than your rational intellect at sensing when these things are where they're supposed to be versus when they're not where they're supposed to be. And believability is largely a matter of feel. So this sleeve is still on its upswing. And then once you have this basically the way you want it, most of the hard work is done. Oh, I'm going way over where I should go. Let's see. Let's see. Just gotta clean up in here a little bit. Let's see if this works. So once again, this is not perfect. There are a lot of things that could be improved about it, but you can see how the process works of setting up a relatively predictable source of the motion. That would be the pendulum. The pendulum's going to have a very regular swing. And then you go straight ahead on overlapping elements. And you go by feel about where they would go and how far they would be dragging behind the thing that is pulling them. So once this is all done, you can go back and you can do a cleanup layer where you do one drawing that includes all of both the body of the coat and the sleeves as one thing. Right now, all of these elements are on their own layers so that each sleeve is separate. But if you wanted to do cleanup, you could make a new layer and you could go back in with a fine pencil and just do one drawing that was nice and clean, that had everything all together. So you don't need to know, like for example, here's a drawing that I never would have been able to plan out in advance. I would never know that the body is exactly here, and this sleeve is exactly here, and this sleeve is exactly here. But by going straight ahead on one thing at a time, what I end up with is something that's very organic, that was fun and easy to do, and that I can easily improve and clean up without driving myself crazy by trying to plan it pose to pose. So this is an instance where doing things straight ahead is the really only practical way to do it, unless you are such an unbelievable savant that you can predict the movement of erratic things like cloth in a multivariate scenario every split second. And I really question most people's ability to do that. If you can, then by all means go for it. But even if you are not superpowered in that way, you can still animate all kinds of complex stuff if you just break it down, go straight ahead, and take your time. So I hope that this helped people out, and if you have questions, please leave them in the comments, and thank you for watching.